Welcome, everyone, to Data and Society and to our Databite series. For those who haven't been to Data and Society before, we are a research institute where we think about how data-driven technologies are intersecting with different social processes and how do we get ahead of that by understanding what's at stake and what's playing out. And this series is an opportunity to invite friends and interlocutors who we really want to learn from and to invite the broader community who we are excited to be here participating with us. If you aren't a regular member of our activities, Audrey is right here. You should find her afterwards and get on the mailing lists so that we can actually make sure to include you in future events. And so I want to now introduce an old and dear friend, Bruce Schneier, who I actually got his bio given to me, and I didn't realize you've written 14 books.
I fly a lot of airplanes.
Oh my gosh. 14 books, which apparently, he just keeps going. And this is, he's really a security expert and thinking about security and privacy issues in a really sophisticated way that moves across a variety of different communities and helps showcase the complexity of these issues from the technical to the social. And so we asked him to do this talk at a time where security and privacy might not have been front and center for people, and things might have changed a little bit. So it's a perfect time to be having these issues. And so without further ado, thank you, Bruce.
Thanks. A little bit lower. So this actually isn't the first talk I've given since the election, but it really is the first talk where I'm going to talk about the election, because mostly I was in denial for the past several weeks. And I think that's important for us to really think about, because we're all going to process this in our own way, in our own time. And we've got a little time, so we should. When I think about what I'm going to do for the next 4 years, because I think a lot of us are sort of rethinking what should we do for the next 4 years. There are three basic areas I think we all need to think about. The first one is to fight the excesses that are going to happen. A lot of that's going to be reactive. We're not going to know the legislative proposals. We're not going to know the court rulings, the cases. We're not going to know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. So a lot of that is going to be reactive. And I think for the next 4 years, a lot of our work is going to be in reactive mode, because there's going to be a lot of stuff. And if we thought we were playing whack-a-mole before, it's going to be, I think, a lot worse. Some of it can be preemptive. I think we can think about the things that are likely to happen and just figure out if there's anything that we can do or we can see done beforehand that will make it easier. I think we're going to lose a lot, and our goal is going to be to lose as little as possible. The second thing I think we have to do is to lay the groundwork for the future. That if we assume that society will get out of this, there will be a need for other answers. When I think about the work here at the center, that's sort of what I'm thinking about. What are the social science, the data science, the ethics of whatever we are thinking about? How can we put things in place that when new answers are needed, there are some that are out there that can be taken? And the third is that what we were doing all along, which is try to solve the existing problems. That a lot of the problems caused by the intersection of technology and society aren't going to disappear for 4 years because we're fighting fires, and we need to keep doing that. And that's a lot. But I think there's going to be a lot called upon us in the next 4 years, and we have to start getting that. So it's through that lens, through those three things, that I want to talk about what was going to be, because this was proposed in October, the topic of today, which is security and privacy in our hyper-connected world. More importantly, security and privacy in the world of things, in the Internet of Things world. So in 2011, Mark Andreessen famously said that software is eating the world. What he meant was everything is becoming software. Now, here we are in 2016, everything is becoming hardware. software is still eating the world, but it's eating the world on lots of little computers. And we're creating a world where everything is a computer. Right? So this is not a phone. This is a computer that makes phone calls. Your refrigerator is a computer that keeps things cold. Your microwave is a computer that makes things hot. An ATM machine is a computer with money inside. Right? These are all computers. Your car used to be a mechanical device with some computers in it. Now it's a computer with 4 wheels and an engine. Actually, it's a 100-computer distributed system with 4 wheels and an engine. And this is a very important shift happening at all levels of our lives. Right? We wear computers. I mean, I kind of wear this, but fitness trackers, medical devices, they're in our homes, they're at work, they're going to be in cities. So these paradigms we have of a web that we connect to is really no longer accurate. It's a fully computerized world we live in. Right? It's not the internet, it's the Internet of Things. And when I think about the Internet of Things, it really has 3 parts. First is the sensors that collect data about us and our environment. And a lot of what the Internet of Things does is it collects data. Right? So this smartphone, among other things, collects location data. And it knows where I am, it knows where I've been, it knows you're all here. Smart thermostats collect data about temperature. Smart light bulbs collect data about movement. We're talking about internet-enabled street and highway sensors collecting data about cars and other movements. Right, so they're the sensors. There are the smarts that figure out what the data means and what to do about it. Right? All of the processing, all of the memory, largely in the cloud. But big databases of the sensor data and algorithms that try to make sense of it. All connected, most of it in the cloud. And the third part are the actuators that affect us and our environment. I mean, the whole point of a smart thermostat is not to record the temperature, but to change the temperature, right? To turn on and off the air conditioner and furnace. Or I think of a driverless car responding to real-time traffic data and is making steering decisions. And so all of these sensors connected to decision makers that eventually do things. So you can think of the sensors as the eyes and ears of the internet. And you can think of the actuators as the hands and feet of the internet. And the stuff in the middle as the brain of the internet. So we're creating an internet that senses, thinks, and acts. And if you read any science fiction, you'll recognize that is the textbook definition of a robot. And I think the right way to think of our computerized world today is that we are creating a planet-wide robot, and we don't even realize it. Now, it's interesting. This isn't a robot in the classical sense. Right? When we think of a robot, we think of the movies and television, a discrete thing with the sensors and actuators attached to it and the brain inside. Right, so it's a robot, it's data from Star Trek. It's C-3PO from Star Wars. It's those discrete entities. This is a distributed robot. It doesn't have a centralized brain. The parts are controlled by different people or different processes. It doesn't have a singular goal or a singular focus. And it's not something deliberately designed. It's an emergent property that comes out of the computers and networks that we've built. And it's a conflux of a lot of different technologies. Right? It's a conflux of mobile computing, cloud computing, persistent computing, the huge databases of information, the Internet of Things, or really more generally, cyber-physical systems, and autonomy on some arc towards artificial intelligence. But to think of it as smart things that act on the world in a direct and physical manner. Right? An internet that senses, thinks, and acts. Now, smart's kind of a tough word here. I mean, it's actually not very smart. I mean, parts of it are really dumb. But it's something that will get smarter and certainly more capable the more we attach to it. And it's certainly getting more powerful due to the increased interconnections and the increased number of objects. It's able to do more things. It's able to learn more things. And what this means for me in my world, which is security, is that internet security becomes everything security. All of the lessons I know from the world of computers and the internet become applicable everywhere. With one very important difference: the threats are greater. So traditionally, in computer security, you'll hear something called the CIA triad, which has nothing to do with the CIA. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, availability. Those are three basic areas of computer security. Right? Confidentiality: is your data safe from others who shouldn't get at? Integrity: has it not been changed without your knowledge? And availability: can you get at it when you want to? And there are attacks against all three of those things. Primarily in the world of computers, we were concerned about confidentiality. We were concerned about data privacy. And that is still an enormous concern, especially in a world where more data is collected. But the threats come in a lot of different forms. Right? Availability threats. You think of ransomware as a threat against availability. Right? Someone encrypts the data at a hospital and says you can't get at it unless you do these things. Or encrypts the fair sale terminals in San Francisco. Right? That's an availability threat. Right? Or a computer virus that deletes your data. There are integrity threats. Going into a bank computer and manipulating bank balances. But once you get to this Internet of Things, this world-sized robot, the integrity and availability threats are much worse than the confidentiality threats. Right? Basically, the effects are greater. Suddenly, there is real risk to life and property. That is no longer just about bits, it's about the world. Right? From my perspective, a computer is a computer, a hack is a hack, right? And security is security, but there's a fundamental difference between you crashing your spreadsheet and you lose your data, or crashing your car and you lose your life. From a computer security perspective, it's the exact same thing. Might even be the same processor. But the effects are now real world. And that, I think, changes everything. And there are some things that, let me do it this way. Traditionally, our computers and phones are as secure as they are, even though they're not very, for two reasons. The first is that there are teams of engineers at Microsoft, Apple, Google, and the big companies doing their best to design them securely in the first place. Right? There's a lot of effort gone into the security of this device. A lot of people, a lot of thought, a lot of engineering, a lot of money. And two, devices like this, our computer and phones, are able to be patched quickly. Those teams of engineers can quickly deliver security patches to our devices when problems are found. You run a Windows machine, you get a patch, you get patches the second Tuesday of every month. You have an iPhone, you get patches pretty regularly, sort of on demand. That ecosystem starts failing as we move down into cheaper devices. It's just, when you get to the low-cost embedded systems like DVRs and home routers and webcams, you don't have those engineers. They're a much lower profit margin. They're often designed offshore by third parties. They just don't have security teams either associated with developing the devices or on staff when something happens. And we saw that in the Dyn attack. Even worse, a lot of these devices have no way to patch themselves. And right now, the way you update your DVR is to throw it away and buy a new one. Right? That's the methodology. There's nothing else. We also get our security from the fact that we replace these things regularly. We replace our computers, our phones, really every couple of years. And that's not true for these embedded systems. Your DVR is going to last 5 to 10 years, your refrigerator 25 years, You're going to replace your home thermostat approximately never. So we have these, and we're seeing this right now. Right? We saw the Mirai botnet, the Dyne attack. There are vulnerabilities that will remain in our system until these devices are cleared out. And that will be the better part of a decade. So I have a fundamental market failure here, right? Because neither the buyer nor the seller care. You might at home have a DVR that is part of the Dyne botnet. Sorry, the Mirai botnet that was used against Dyne and now is being used against a lot of people. You don't know it's true. Right? You have no way of knowing. And you kind of fundamentally don't care. Now, you want a DVR that works and is reasonably priced. The seller wants to sell you a DVR that works, has a lot of features and reasonably priced. And this fact that it can be used by a third party to attack a fourth party is an externality. It's not something that you care about in your purchasing decision. So security is an arms race, and I've been saying this for years. And technology perturbs the arms race as technology does. And there are a few lessons from computers in the arms race that I want to bring into now general security. Some of them are obvious, some are less so. First, on the internet, attack is easier than defense. This is true. It is not necessarily true. It happens to be true. And if you look at arms races through history, you'll see back and forth between attacks and defenses over decades. But right now, in these decades, on computers, on the internet, attack is easier than defense. For all sorts of reasons. I think the most important one is complexity. That there's so much complexity in the systems that is very, very hard to secure them and then relatively easy to find a flaw. That, combined with other things, just makes attack easier than defense. Defense is always playing catch-up. Second is that most software is kind of lousy out there. And the reasons for this are largely historical. And basically, we don't want to pay for good software. Now, good, fast, cheap, pick any two. We picked fast and cheap. Now, if you designed the space shuttle in the 70s, you picked good, and it was extraordinarily expensive. But you got really good software. And poor software is full of bugs, and some bugs have security vulnerabilities. And this was largely okay when we were just crashing your spreadsheet. Right? When we were just crashing Candy Crush. It was fine. You rebooted. You got used to it. You did a lot of backups. You saved. We learned how to deal with it. The fact that most software is basically crap. Right? Because it was okay. Crap was good enough. But as we move into this world of the computers directly controlling our physical world, it stops being good enough. Third lesson is that there are vulnerabilities that show up in the interconnections. And this has been interesting to watch. The more we connect things to each other, the more vulnerabilities in one thing affect another thing. Now, we learned in the Dyne attack that a vulnerability in these Internet of Things devices, these DVRs and webcams and other devices, could be used by an attacker to launch a DDoS attack against a DNS server, which in turn could take down Twitter and Reddit and a bunch of other websites. Right? It's a cascade of vulnerabilities causing the eventual problem we talk about. And this happens a lot. There's a good story. Matt Honig, a tech writer, a few years ago wrote about pretty much a massive attack he was the victim of. I think if I have this right, it was a vulnerability in his Amazon account, allowed hackers to get into his Apple account, which allowed them to get into his Gmail account, which allowed them to delete his Twitter account. And you read the story, and it's interactions between different systems where one thing here affects another thing there. Just a few days ago, someone posted a paper on how easy it is to guess credit card numbers. And you can guess them because different sites have different ways of verifying credit card numbers. Some use CCV codes, some use expiration date, some use other things. And by trying to guess simultaneously across different sites, you can play them off on each other piece of information you learn here, you use here, and you build up all the information. And this is a nice research paper. They're able to, within a few minutes, starting from almost nothing, recover credit card number, CCV code, and expiration date. I mean, everything you needed to commit fraud with the card. And it's nobody's problem, but together it becomes a problem. Third, actually I'm up to 4. On the internet, everybody has to stop the best attackers in the world. And this is because attacks scale. I mean, the internet is a great machine for scaling things. That's why everything is so cool, because you can scale them to levels you couldn't do otherwise in the physical world. But that's also true for attackers. Right? Cyber criminals can make more money faster. Digital pirates can copy more movies faster than I was a kid and I had to use a tape. Right? Even electronic espionage scales. The NSA learned that. And this means that fewer attackers can do more damage because of better technology. And they don't have to worry about distance. Right? I live in Minneapolis. I only have to worry about the burglars whom driving my home in Minneapolis is worth the bother. If one of you people is a fantastic burglar, I don't care. Right? You're not going to fly to Minneapolis to rob my house. It's just not. But those kind of barriers don't exist on the internet. And even worse, because we have software, expertise can be encapsulated. And so I'm using the Dyn botnet again as an example. So some clever person figured out that vulnerability and created the botnet, and then he or she released the code. And now it's in a couple of dozen botnets. You actually, if you want, you can rent time on one. On the dark net, there's a botnet for hire service. Somebody you don't like, you can do it. Right, but only one person had to discover the vulnerability. Then it's encapsulated in software, and everyone can use it. And this just changes the way things work. And it becomes more dangerous even as our systems become more critical. I mean, this robot affects the world. So we're talking about things like crashing all the cars, shutting down all the power plants. Because these systems fail differently. I read an article last week about someone writing how computerized voting machines counted more efficiently than humans. And that's true. I mean, it's actually true. Computers do a better job at counting votes than people until they don't. Right? Because when people count, they count pretty well, and there's probably a little error rate. Computers will count perfectly until it's like 0 and 0, and they just don't count at all. Right? Driverless cars will be much safer than people driving. You know, we will save 30,000 lives a year until they don't. Until all the cars crash into all the other cars, and now we're done. Right? And that difference in failure mode is hard for us to imagine because we're not used to it. We're used to more random failures than systemic failures. So this is what we know about the internet, and this is what will be true about everything. And there are two basic paradigms of security that we have in our world. There's paradigm A, which is secure it well and properly the first time. This comes from the world of dangerous things. Planes, automobiles, medical devices, buildings. This is where licensing comes from, and accreditation, and testing, and government approval, and certification. All of those things live in this world. And then there's paradigm B, which is agile security. And it comes from the world of software, the heretofore benign world of software. And that's the world of put it out there quickly, but be able to fix it even quicker if you find a mistake. And this is the world of Patch Tuesday. These two worlds are coming together in our cars, in our voting machines, and they're not coming together very well right now. My Windows XP, I don't know if you know this, this is what, a 13-year-old operating system, is still in most ATM machines, even though it is not supported anymore. Right? There are medical systems coming from this world that use computers that can't have patches installed, because if you install a security patch, you would invalidate all the testing, and it wouldn't be a approved device anymore. Because the testing world wasn't designed for the agility of regular patches. Earlier this year, I think in the summer, Chrysler recalled 1.4 million cars to fix a software vulnerability, because the way they had to do it was a recall. In September of this year, Tesla had a vulnerability in their Model S, and they're in this world, and they downloaded a patch to all their users overnight. It's hard to say which one's actually better, because the patch better be correct. So for the past year or so, I've been talking about this as a policy problem. That fundamentally, we just don't have a regulatory structure that knows how to handle this. That while there are a lot of technical issues, getting the economics and psychology right is more important, and getting it wrong is too easy. And law and tech have to work together. I actually think this is the most important lesson of Edward Snowden. Right? We knew that technology can subvert law. He showed us that law can subvert technology. And that if you don't have both working, you end up with neither. So I actually look a lot towards regulation. And about a month ago, I was testifying before Congress, and I told a room full of mostly Republicans that they're going to need to regulate this space. That the world of dangerous things gets regulated, and this will happen. And right now, we tend to regulate in silos. Right? The FDA regulates medical devices. The FTC deals with deceptive trade practices. The FAA with aircraft. And the computers don't work that way. Right? The internet is horizontal. The internet breaks down barriers. The internet isn't a thing and a thing and a thing. The internet is everything. I mean, already there are apps on this phone that log health information and, communicate with my car and can set a thermostat. And that's already 4 different government agencies. And it's just one device. So if we're going to ever, I think, deal with these security issues in any real way, we're going to need some kind of government structure that treats these devices as computers with things attached to them and not things with computers in them. And I think that within the decade, we're going to see a new government agency. I do. And I say that even though we have been and are now even much more in a government of small government, ineffectual government. In the 20th century, new technologies regularly spawned government agencies. Right? Trains did, cars did, airplanes did, radio did, nuclear power did. Right? Each one of those technologies caused the creation of a new government agency for a bunch of reasons. Right? There had to be a place to embody the expertise, and these technologies brought with them collective action problems that needed a government solution. And a lot of people have been thinking what sorts of regulations would be needed for the Internet of Things. And, you could have your list, different good security practices of testing and patching, data protection laws, support for good research, interoperability requirements, data portability, some kind of liability regime. I mean, you come up with a list. You can come up with a list of problems of why this will be hard to make work. Right? A lack of expertise, a lack of, I think, willingness to do any of the hard work. Same regulatory capture problems we have elsewhere. And the devil is in the details. But I think that governments will get involved regardless. That the risks are simply too great. That government is already involved in physical systems. And disaster will spur them into action because nothing motivates government like fear. And our choice isn't government involvement or no government involvement, but smart government involvement versus stupid government involvement. I mean, just like after the terrorist attack September 11th, we saw a very small government president and Congress create a new federal agency kind of out of zombie piece parts in something like 40 days. We had a new massive government agency. I think you're going to see that same kind of thing the first time 1,000 cars crash. Or something happens to thermostats and people, lose their homes due to pipes freezing. And I think that's a real risk. So when I look at this Internet of Things, I see sort of that as a big problem that we have to solve. It's not going away. No matter who's president, no matter who's in charge, that is a problem in the next few years. The risks are real. And I think we also need to think about disconnecting systems. That if we cannot secure complex systems, then we must not build a world where everything is computerized and everything is connected. And my guess is that within a decade, we're going to reach the high watermark of computerization and connectivity. That now we are rushing to computerize and connect everything. And that afterwards we're going to make more conscious decisions about what to connect and why and how. And I think it's an analogy with nuclear power here. That in the 70s there was a rush to everything would be nuclear power. It would solve all of our energy needs. We had some disasters. 3 Mile Island was the big one. And we didn't get rid of nuclear power. We recognized more realistically the benefits and the risks, and it became one element in a much more complex energy infrastructure. And I think something similar will happen with data and connectivity. I mean, not now. We're still really in the honeymoon phase of connectivity, and both governments and corporations are punch drunk on our data. I mean, just like, I don't know if you remember the NSA slogan in the Snowden documents, collect it all. We're kind of in connect it all. But we have an opportunity here that we are now realizing that all of this data is a liability. That in an era where we're actually worried about the government collecting it and using it against us, that even having it is a problem. I mean, there's a phrase I've heard for a little while that data is a toxic asset. And I think we need to start really talking about it as a toxic asset. Because in the big data mentality, the cost of storage is free, the cost of processing is free, save everything. Why not? There's no cost that might have value. Well, it turns out that saving your data has costs. And it has costs when it's stolen, and you have, as a company, sort of a PR disaster, you're being sued, you might have regulatory problems because you didn't keep it properly. But it's also toxic because there could be changes in law and you can be compelled to turn it over. I don't know if people know I'm on the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and we have a full-page ad coming out in the next issue of Wired, which should hit the stands like now. It might have even done it today or yesterday. And we're saying this. Our headline is, "Attention Silicon Valley, your threat model has changed." Right? That it used to be, it was great for you to collect the movement data of all of your customers. But now it might not be so great anymore. And we're trying to tell companies to do various things, to encrypt their data. Right? Encrypt your data so it's harder to get at. Delete your data. If you don't need it, delete it. Data that is deleted cannot be turned over to anyone under any compulsion. It just doesn't exist. They want Silicon Valley companies to reveal requests as much as possible, say what is happening, and then to resist these orders. And we've seen some of that. We've seen some really, really good examples of at least the last two. But I think we're going to need more. All right, so that's where I feel my program is. I mean, I know I'm going to spend a lot of time fighting proposals, whether they're laws that might be passed, or whether it's legal court battles where we have to weigh in, or policy things. I think there is the preemptive part, which is going to be, I think, trying to convince companies that the business model of collecting everyone's data, that all of this surveillance data, that the Internet of Things will produce all this surveillance data, that saving it might not be the best idea. I think we have to sort of, again, keep laying the groundwork for other ways to interact with these devices that are more preserving of liberty and freedom. And then still, we have this problem of the Internet of Things becoming actually physically dangerous to us. That's not going to go away because the attackers aren't going away. So I think it's real easy to despair after the election. And I mean, I've done a lot of it, and I assume a lot of other people have. But I think we have a big opportunity here. Because the narrative is night and day, but the actual election was extraordinarily close. I mean, I don't think that as a data scientist, there's a lot of conclusions to be drawn. You know, a few votes go the other way, and we would be congratulating ourselves on what a progressive society we were. And it would have been the same society, right? You know, plus or minus a comey, and this would have been real different. And if Clinton won, I think we would still have the same deep fundamental problems in society that are being ripped open and exposed right now. The difference is we would be much more complacent about solving them. Instead, we have the election going the other way, the narrative completely going the other way. We have all of these deep problems exposed, and I think a very motivated, very galvanized, very scared, losing side willing to work to make this better. So I would like to think of this as cowpox instead of smallpox. That if Clinton won, this would have been way worse in 8 years. The problems would be worse. We'd be further from a solution. The actual solution would be more disruptive, more violent. That the fact that we can work to solve them now is actually in our benefit if we seize the opportunity. So, I don't know. I guess we got like another few weeks to grieve, then we actually have to get to work. And we have a lot of work to do. Our priorities are all changing. And it's never more important. Thank you. So I think at this point I take questions. From the audience. I see a question back.
Put this on a mic so that we can actually record it. I'm going to start back there.
Question back there.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was both enlightening and inspiring. So I actually had a really particular question. I wanted to ask you a bit more about your thoughts on this idea of requiring a new federal agency. It's something that I've thought a lot about in the context of intelligent systems and robotics. And I think recently I've sort of come to the mind that I'm not so convinced that it is either necessary or in the best interest to have one agency that would deal with, I don't know what it would be, but something particular to computers. Because creating one such agency in a way follows a potentially destructive logic of computers that everything can be reduced to digital data. And the fact is that computers, whether they're intelligent systems or just automation or whatever, right? Like, they're very different in different social contexts. And so maybe there's a baseline security, but what security requirements are going to be might be different in healthcare versus, right? So you sort of get where I'm going, and I'm sort of concerned that, like, I'm still on the fence. I just sort of want to know more.
So this is the debate we need to have. I mean, and that is the other side of the argument, that in fact the differentiators are important enough that they shouldn't be together. Ryan Calo has a really nice paper about creating the Federal Robotics Commission. So worth reading that. And he talks about only in robots, but it's really he makes a good argument for this. My reason for putting it together is that it's the same computer whether you put a propeller on it or wheels on it or an insulin pump on it. It ends up being the same, different context, but it's the same machine, and any solution, even though there might be different levels, will require the same expertise. And right now we have a problem in government that the expertise is too diffuse. That we need to at least put the tech part together. Now, maybe this will be the computer advisory council for the FDA and for the FTC and the FCC, right? So maybe you'll have one thing do another. Ryan Calo talks about some area when NASA had to advise the NTSB on something because that's where the expertise was. So, I mean, you do have a point, and I think it's a really important one, that the differences in what they do are great, but what it is the same. We're getting to these general purpose devices. A computer is a general purpose. It can do anything. So we're going to need some general purpose expertise, and where do we put it? So that's why I tend to favor one agency. But, I mean, Chris Hoofnagel says the FTC should do most of this. That's his solution. But I like that we're having these debates, because otherwise something's going to be thrust upon us with no warning as soon as the public says, Congress, you must do something, and Congress says, here's something, therefore we must do it. And that's my worry.
Thank you, Bruce. I agree, and I think most people would agree with the picture you painted and the general solutions, but kind of the trickiest question is, how do we get there? And in particular, among the companies, like if the market wants to move in that direction, there's kind of like a prisoner's dilemma almost problem where everybody agrees it's better to collect less data, but nobody wants to be the company that does that first, because you can always get a tiny advantage by collecting more and never deleting anything. And the other part is with regards to regulation. I don't know the full history of regulation in all industries, but I've never seen an industry so against regulation collectively, all the companies together, fighting it everywhere, in Brussels, in Washington, everywhere. So I kind of, like, for me, it's a big question. How do we move towards that future that you suggest?
So I think it's hard. In data collection, I think you're right, that everybody just wants to collect data. No one wants any regulation on anything. And that comes from the safe and benign world. When it comes to dangerous things, there's going to be no choice. Right? And those industries are used to regulation. Right? Cars are used to being regulated. Airplanes are. Medical devices are. So banking is. Right? So they're going to get what they're used to. My guess is that when things start actually becoming physically dangerous, when disasters happen, regulation will happen whether the industry wants it or not. Right? I mean, your device starts killing people, you get regulated. That's the way it goes. I know you don't like it, but we can't help you. Data is going to be much harder. And you're right. It's going to be real hard to convince companies to unilaterally disarm. And I think if we don't, that'll be our undoing. I worry a lot less about the hacking and illegal uses of data and more about the legal uses of data. And you have companies like Google say we only respond to lawful orders. Well, that's right. That's going to be the problem. It's not going to be the unlawful orders. So you might be right that we might not be able, that it might take a huge disaster before companies say, wow, were we immoral back then? We better not do that anymore. Just like after World War II, European phone companies didn't collect call records. They just had these clicks, and they would count clicks. Why? Because during World War II, call records were used to round up associates. So they just didn't do that. US, we didn't have that, and we did it because that's the way we did billing. I mean, now that's, in a sense, over because everyone's on universal plans. Now it's collected for other reasons. So I think you're right, that getting from here to there will be a problem. And the best we can do is try. But I think we have a huge data exposure, especially in a government that will use it. And I've been trying to think exactly how you'd see domestic surveillance ramp up. You probably wouldn't see it inside the NSA. I mean, the NSA is an organization that's optimized for collecting, right? For scooping up all the communications in Kazakhstan. But if you were doing anything domestic, you don't have to collect, right? Because these companies are collecting already. You just have to aggregate. So you're more likely to see something from the FBI, like the Verizon order we saw from Snowden. Right? Turn over all of this data, and it'll be to some organization, probably in Department of Homeland Security, and it'll probably start through some, relatively, I guess sensible is a bad word, relatively, I guess uncontroversial is a bad word, relatively, I don't know what kind of word to use. Defensible. Okay, I like that. Relatively defensible reason. Right? We are going after these extremists, so here's our list of extremists, but now we need extremists and who they talk to, and now as long as you're doing that, you might as well give us everybody. That's what the Verizon order said, so we can do the searching. Right? And then suddenly you have this sort of shadow organization deep inside DHS without any of the prohibitions the NSA has, so it's probably more FBI, Department of Justice, and a few steps and it's collecting everything because everything is out there. So don't know, but that's the kind of thing I'm thinking might happen.
Hi. Are we standing up or?
You can stand up or sit as you see fit.
I like sitting. I wanted to kind of echo some of Madeline's points about the need to reinsert domain expertise back into these discussions. Part of the way that we got to here was that technology companies used the position of technology to disrupt these existing regulatory regimes. Instead of being a transportation company, Uber was a technology company. Instead of being a media company, Facebook is a technology company. And I'm wondering now how we start to kind of reinsert some of that context back. And I'm wondering if what you're saying is true, whether or not the reason why we haven't been able to regulate these spaces is due to a lack of expertise about the function of technology, or a growing belief or argument against institutions that has been sped up by these technology companies using these mechanisms. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that, about whether or not this is more of an institutional problem that we're facing now, more than one of technology.
I think it's both. The technology fuels it, and it's been. And the Ubers and the Facebooks are interesting because you're right. They sort of rose up along the side of the existing industries to disrupt them with the story of we are not them. We're different. We're not a hotel. We're not a taxi company. We're not a media company. We're not a communications company. Basically, we're not anything. And it's a little bit of a zigzag, and depending on which regulation you throw at them, they're not that. I think you have you're right. From my narrow perspective, is really about the security. And that is fundamentally technical. And it's not what it's doing and more what it is. So I think you're right. When we're talking about these massive social technical systems, when the technical hits society, it hits it at the point of what it is. And I think we have to treat it at that point. My issues are further back where it's technical, where it tends to be one and the same. It's the same database, the same servers, no matter which one of those industries it is. So it sounds like we kind of need both in some ways. And maybe it is one agency providing the tech expertise to the other agency. I mean, just like you see in surveillance. In a lot of cases, it's not the NSA doing the surveillance, but the NSA provides technical expertise, which means they technically do it, although the legal authority and all the social stuff comes from a different agency. This is the kind of stuff worth teasing out. But my real point is I want to do this now. That this is the time to have the conversation. Because I don't want the disaster to happen and we have like 20 days to come up with the answer. So the more of these conversations we do now, I think the better we'll be, the better equipped we'll be.
So I'm going to take host prerogative and actually ask a question building off of that, which is, you say that security is fundamentally a technical issue. And yet one of the things security folks have long known is social engineering hacks are often quite effective at everything from password acquisition to a whole set of different issues. One of the things I would argue we are starting to see is a form of much more sophisticated social hacks on security at a manipulation level. We've seen institutions be manipulated for long periods of time. We're now seeing technical infrastructures be used to manipulate. Botnets were understood historically in terms of malware or things that would get to economic gain, not necessarily things that would be used for information warfare. We are seeing ways of vulnerabilities in our systems that aren't necessarily requiring technical sophistication to piece together data to do pretty nefarious things. So I'm curious from your perspective, especially from a perspective of security, how do we start complementing the questions of ways in which systems can be manipulated through social engineering means at a higher scale, which I would argue has come up with the same set of challenges in the hyper-connected world as you see as the technical components?
Right. So if I said security is primarily technical, that was me being sloppy. Because I think, security is the place where the technology meets people. And there's no such thing as security as a concept without people. That it is the linkage of the socio-technical system. And I think that as technologists in the security world, we've largely done a bad job. And whenever you see the user blamed for things, I think that is the technologist sort of covering the fact that they screwed up. It's things like, we're trying to teach you not to plug USB drives into your computer because it's dangerous, which is in a sense idiotic advice. What is a USB drive for? Right? Don't click on links because they might be malicious. But just that it's a link, right? And it's simply, why we design a computer so bad that when you plug in a random USB drive, you might get your system owned. When you click on a link you don't trust, you might get malware. That is a fundamental technological misdesign of the system. Now, we might not be able to do better, but blaming the user is a complete cop-out there. So yes, I think we are seeing, and we'll always see attacks that attack the human side of any human computer or any human technological interface. And that'll be true pre-computers, and it'll be true forever. But I think we can design tech that will give the user more freedom and less worry. And I think we're doing a very bad job at that. And I think blaming the user is a cop-out. The person might always be the weak link. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where that isn't true. I think because people are so variable. But we have to make it so the weak link isn't disastrous. And we try to do that in the real world. The reason there's a fire escape here is that we are the weak link. Sooner or later, someone's going to set fire to something, and the elevator won't work, and we have another mechanism. Those sorts of things, we haven't built them in cyberspace as robustly. A lot of it because it's so new and moving so fast. We just we haven't had the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. We haven't had those sorts of disasters, which again, through regulation, force these new safety features. I think that'll become, and I think it's just because it didn't matter. Nobody cared if your software crashed. But now people are going to care, and I think you're going to see a lot more push from government to make the stuff safer. If plugging a malicious USB stick into your computer means somebody dies, then there'll no longer be warnings, please don't do it. It'll be either disabled or the effect won't be able to happen. Those will be the two choices. Because society doesn't hold truck with that. I don't know if I answered the question.
I have a question about whether the federal U.S. government is the best site for this type of regulation to occur. And partly I ask this because nation states have this tendency to accumulate exploits, without telling others so that they can hit them when they're not expecting it. And I'm not sure if the United States might be the first site for this kind of catastrophic, destructive kind of event. So I'm wondering if there's other places, maybe even like a state, the way, emissions regulation came out of California, textbooks came out of Texas.
Right. I think it's an important conversation to have, because I kind of palmed an enormous card when I talked about U.S. domestic regulation to solve what is fundamentally a national problem. I think there is the kind of rising tide effect that we saw in California emissions control. That because software is write once, sell everywhere, that all the costs is in development, that if the United States and a few big markets have these higher standards, that the things that will be sold around the world will meet those standards because it's just easier than forking your system. So I think we have a lot of benefit there. I think it's worth discussing whether the federal government is the right place for this. Right? A state, especially a powerful state, can certainly do a lot. It's hard to see an organization that's international that right now is functional enough to do a lot. I think the ITU, which controls telecommunications, would be a disaster just because of the way they're governed. That we, the internet, have sort of figured out this multi-stakeholder governance model that works really well in our fast-moving world. And I think giving it up will be a problem. But that is something worth thinking about. And maybe a state could do something, or maybe something larger. I mean, it's some kind of G20 type of thing, and I don't know. I saw a hand there first.
You talked a lot about the two worlds, one of which is the world of dangerous things and regulation, and the other which is the agile software world coexisting and kind of meeting in a not so great way. And then you spoke at length and I think very eloquently about the need for regulation in this kind of second world. But do you think that there's a regulatory environment that can keep pace with the world of agile software development and patches? Like, given what we have today, the world of dangerous things is inherently tied to it.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to figure it out. And this is more general. We're now living in a world where technology outpaces law, and that's relatively new. It used to be a new technology, took a couple of decades to become ubiquitous, and law could figure it out as it went along. And now things are happening so fast. I mean, even the Microsoft antitrust trial, by the time the trial was over, the software at issue was irrelevant. Right? And very different than the AT&T antitrust trial, a couple of decades earlier. And now it's even worse. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal, and this is more general than security, more general than where I'm talking, how we build laws in this world of very fast-moving technological change and social change due to technological change. And I think it'll be something like putting laws on the results, on the people, and not on the technology. So not regulating email or VCR recorders, but communications and content distribution. Ways of making laws technologically invariant. We have to get way better at that. Now, it's just really hard for me to talk about things the government should do better, right? But I think we're going to be forced to, because things are moving so fast. Really interesting to watch the, I think it's CPSA, which back when this computer crime law was written, email was considered communications, and you had to get a warrant. But email left on the server for more than, I think, 30 days was considered abandoned and didn't count as communications. Fast forward to today, an email left on the server for more than 30 days means you're a Gmail user. Right? Suddenly the intent is now completely reversed because technology just changed. And the outdated law is having the reverse effects that we wanted back then. Right? That's was just really badly written. But back then we didn't realize. I mean, storage was expensive, communication was cheaper, and of course you downloaded your email to your computer. That's what you did. Right? Now you don't. And I think we're going to see a lot of those in all sorts of laws. So I don't know how. We're going to have to figure this out. Either that, or we're just going to be in a world where law will never be where technology is. So maybe, and maybe there's some way to do that. Maybe there's some way you deal in the court system where it's figured out sort of on the fly. And you can imagine that working. But I think this is a bigger problem than security, one we actually have to solve. Because I don't think the pace of technology is going to change anytime soon. So hand back there.
Hi. So I don't come out of the technology world. I come out of the nonprofit and education world. And I wonder what your thoughts are about, we have regulatory systems, for example, in Flint, right, that completely failed people, low-income communities. You have regulatory systems in NYCHA, in the public housing here, that completely fail those communities. And it concerns me that we could have these regulatory systems, but that once again, they're sort of, the failures happen among communities of greatest need.
So I think that'll happen anyway. I think that will happen, and it happens all the time. I think no regulation is worse. So yes, regulation is only as good as the regulation, the enforcement, the environment, the world, how much voice the people being regulated have when something goes wrong, and those problems aren't going to go away. But if we don't have a regulation, then it's everybody's water. It's everything. So these are all imperfect solutions. I tend to like lots of different power centers watching each other. I think over the past few decades, we've really let corporate power rise and government power sink, and we have a lot of problems with that. I want a little rebalancing, and it's government, it's corporations, it's NGOs, it's the press. These are all imperfect systems. These are all systems that are prone to failure. Technology will perturb any balance we set. We will forever be tinkering. We'll forever get it wrong. We'll forever try to fix it. But the more groups we have, the better chance we have, I think, of doing it properly. Yochai Benkler writes about this pretty eloquently. I don't know. He writes about it kind of densely. Eloquently, if you take the time to read it. That you need these multiple sources of power. And I don't think the individual abuses ever go away. But hopefully we correct to the mean at all times. It's the runaway abuses that I worry about more.
So I want to return a little bit to the thing that you started with, which was actually that the effects are combinatoric. So when you hit the IoT. So you're talking about control over technology. That's much harder when there are network effects going on.
Right.
I was wondering if you could speak to that.
I think that's a huge problem. The failure modes are different is something we're not used to. And in computers, we are used to that. And it's kind of, I think one of my jobs is to keep saying that into the real world. That, you're thinking of these problems as house fires, right? There's some rate of house fires in your city, and you've got a police department, you deal with them, so many per week. But instead, computer security looks more like floods. Either there's no flood or everybody is flooded. And we just have to keep saying that. And I don't have a good answer. But the fact that I have two real analogies means we can deal with both of them. Just to remind people that they're moving from one to the other. And they might not realize it. And we saw this a lot, electronic locks and voting machines, but so many places you see the old security paradigm, the new system, and the people who do the security not realizing that the threat model is completely different. So I think we can deal with both, but it's important for people to know which model they're living in. I think that's the issue.
So this maybe speaks to some of that question of what model we're living in and what's the nature of the problem we're solving. So as you spoke, the thing that kept on coming to mind in terms of analogies was actually climate change. Because what we're dealing with here is not a common problem, but a commons problem. This is a problem of the commons. It's something about, it's not, like you said, market failure. It's not anybody's job. And the actual only person that I know of that's started to really make headway from a theoretical standpoint into practical on how do you solve commons problems is a woman named Lynn Ostrom, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. But she, in her principles for solving commons-based problems, said the first principle was you need to define what resource it is that you're protecting. And so my question, I guess, is, first of all, how does this metaphor generally square for you? And the second is, if you were going to define security as a collective natural resource or some not unnatural resource, how would we define that? Because it seems like it might be first step from a governance standpoint to solving some of these issues.
My previous book, the one I wrote most recently, was about trust, and I talk a lot about commons. And I think there are some very important parallels between this and environmentalism. That the notion of the emergent property, that you have this collective action problem, that you have a commons problem. I have not actually thought about putting computer security in Ostrom's taxonomy and sort of list. And that probably is worth doing, so I should think about that. That makes a lot of sense. Email me, and I will.
So a lot of folks have a lot more questions, and luckily there's time to stick around and hang out. First, let's give a huge round of applause.
Thank you.
So it is a Wednesday night at Data and Society, and what that means is that it's time for our regular social hour.